In 2014, my dad passed away. And that deeply impacted me and my family. In trying to find ways to process my grief, I took up two things. I began running, and I got back to drawing. I'm not a birder. I don't know the first thing about birds. I can't identify one from the other on the best of days. My dad loved birds, especially cardinals. So as part of my healing, I started drawing birds. And in the last several years, I've drawn hundreds and hundreds of birds. I've lost count. But it brings me joy. It gives me a safe space to be alone and to be in my head and in my heart. And at the end of it, there's a finished product. There's something on paper that is an accomplishment. My name is Carson Sampson, and I'm a visual artist. I have a small family of 4 whom I love very dearly, and this is my story. So around 2018, I moved from one job to a similar role in a national position. There was more responsibility, and it also involved more travel. Many days I'd wake up in a hotel room in a different city. I wake up in a cold sweat, afraid that I was going to let somebody down that day. That was anxiety, and I had no idea. It wasn't just once in a while, it was every day. In the spring of 2020, the global pandemic was in full swing, and all of us were working from home. I remember hanging up from a very difficult Zoom call and just feeling as if I no longer wanted to be myself. I really just didn't want to be anything. I wanted to disappear or walk off the face of the earth. At about that time, my thoughts started going really dark. I was quite depressed and very difficult to be around. So at this breaking point, when I realized that I didn't really want to be who I was or with the people I loved, that this was an eye-opener for me, that I needed some help. I spoke to my wife. I told her all of these things. None of them were very pleasant to hear. But she encouraged me, she stood by me, and she asked me to speak to my doctor, which is exactly what I did. That went better than I thought. I was prescribed some medication. I was encouraged to meet with a therapist. I've met with that therapist a few times since then, and I've really appreciated that. So one day, not long after that Zoom call, I went to social media and I posted a photograph and a long diatribe on how I was feeling and how I felt very broken. It was very dark, very negative, and I've often looked back at it and thought that maybe I shouldn't have. But I did. That day, my boss called me because I hadn't just told the whole world where I was, but also my coworkers. And I got a call from my boss, and he was just so great. Told me I needed time to defragment my hard drive. He had observed, recognized, acknowledged the fact that I'd worked too hard and that I'd been burnt out. And there was no pressure to get back to work. It was about walking away from it and finding some time to decompress and look for help. So I got that call. I got permission to just be somewhere else. And I spent 2-3 days in my yard working with my hands. And that helped a little as well. But what I remember most was that the fear I had of acknowledging this and telling the people I work with that I suffered from mental illness was eclipsed by the compassion I experienced and the help I received. So when I was at my absolute worst, I couldn't be a father or a husband. I didn't even want to be myself. I hated every noise in the house. I hated the sound of everybody's voice, but I hated nothing so much as I hated myself. It was not an easy thing to tell my family that I had these feelings. It wasn't easy to tell anybody how I was feeling. It's an embarrassing thing to not be able to fulfill your self-perceived role as husband, dad, whatever it might be for you. But I was so pleasantly surprised and encouraged by their response. Like my kids, they weren't afraid of dad. They understood when dad needed space and time. And they just were themselves. And I'm so grateful, and I love them so much. And if my wife hadn't encouraged me to look for help, I probably wouldn't have, because I was stubborn and I was afraid. But that's what they did, and I'm just so grateful for it. A core issue for me is that I was unhappy. I needed to rediscover joy in every aspect of my life, and I just couldn't. This applies to my family life, my work life, and to my art. I had to enjoy what I was doing and not simply go through the motions. So some things had to be set right for me. Things like medicating, going to therapy, going to the gym, finding physical outlets, things that were good for your body were also good for your mind. And rediscovering joy in my art and what I was doing with my hands, whether it be pencil and paper or just making dinner even. Those things had to be joy-filled. I don't ever want to tell somebody that's just going to be okay. You know, there's joy in the present, there's joy in the moment, there's joy in whatever it is you're doing, whether you're loading trucks or drawing birds. Because to me that feels a lot like a pat answer. It's not easy to find that joy, and there's plenty of time, there are plenty of days, even now, where I find zero joy in those things, right? And we all feel that way sometimes. So for me, the struggle is telling people that there is joy in all of those things, and that all you need to do is pop a couple pills or go to the doctor or hit the gym, and those things will become a-okay and feel normal. And it's not like I want to be happy and bubbly 24/7 every day of my life. I think that's beyond anyone's reasonable expectation. I think it's more about finding a place of contentment where you are. And that, over time, is what real joy looks like. So I went to church from a very early age. I grew up in a church. My parents were pastors, and I worked for the church. But in the last 2 years, I've hardly stepped foot in a church. That's just a practical matter with COVID-19 shutting most of those buildings down. It's hard to get together in a community. But if I'm being completely honest with you and with myself, I'd have to say that I struggled with faith. I struggled with working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday in a ministry, and then being able to immerse myself in worship and step inside a place of worship with the people whom I loved and I knew cared for me, because I was angry and cynical and confused. And so I'm still walking my way through that. I'm not quite where I used to be, and maybe I won't be. Like, I almost think you can't exclude that doubt, because I look at somebody who struggles with their faith and maybe didn't grow up in a faith background, and I would rather tell them that even though like faith is central to who I am, that I struggle too. I would never want to go back to where I was a year and a half ago. I don't ever want to be that person who walked away from the Zoom call lost and distraught, angry and depressed. But someday I might. I don't know. And if I could play this back and tell myself or tell anybody who's watching that the darkness does dissipate, that there is hope in the journey, and that the hardest part of it is acknowledging where you're at and seeking help, whatever that might look like for you. Well, that's the message I want to share. I'm just an average guy. I've never had a platform. I don't hold much influence, but I can make a difference. And if one person hears my story, one person who's experiencing something similar, and they look for the help that they need, then I will have made a huge difference. And all of this, all of the anxiety, depression journey I walk through will be worth it. And so that's how I hope my life will change, not just from a mental health standpoint, that I might make better decisions, feel better about myself, but that I might be of some help to other people. If there was one thing I learned, it was that I wasn't immune from mental illness. And if I wasn't, then no one was. If there was one piece of advice I would give to somebody who's struggling, it would be that despite how alone you feel, you really aren't.